Music and technology have been codependent partners for decades, and excitement about creative forms of artificial intelligence raises questions about how that relationship will evolve.
We've already heard songs performed by deceased singers after fans trained systems on the voices of their idols and then set software to work on synthesizing fake performances.
But living musicians are getting involved too. Grimes said she'd split royalties with people who make music with her AI-powered voice, and closer to my heart, the heavy metal band Tesseract used generative AI to inspire concepts and themes for their most recent album and music videos.
So on this episode of AI IRL, we're going to speak to experts in the music industry to find out whether the working relationship between music and technology will be as sublime as that of me and Nate's.
Yeah, or less friendly, like Liam and Noel Gallagher.
Ryan Groves, great to have you here. So you're the co-founder and CTO of a startup called Infinite Album. Tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So what we do is we use AI to make infinite soundtracks for video games, essentially. And we do this for gamers and game devs, game studios as well. And what this allows is for the soundtrack to be relevant to the game scenario, in whatever scenario it is.
How do you use AI to make some of those tracks?
Yeah, it's quite a process. We sort of break it down. So we sort of break down the music composition, production, performance process, and kind of create different AI models that can do very specific things. Because in general, AI, we're not really at artificial general intelligence yet, and AI is really good at doing very specific things. So we sort of hot swap these AI modules based on whether you need like a sad ambient music or you need like a upbeat rock soundtrack or something like that.
So let's give a hypothetical example. Mm-hmm. What game do you game? I can't remember.
I don't really game, but let's say I'm doing, I don't know, Angry Birds.
All right, let's say Angry Birds. So you're lining up your Angry Bird, mm-hmm. and you've got some optimistic, hopeful music, and then you miss or it hits a building and dies, and then you're generating, presumably, sad music.
Exactly.
It's along those lines, okay. Because I sort of feel like you can do that without AI. So what is it that AI is bringing to that? Why is that different to just having a roster of tracks and just picking the appropriate one for a fight scene or something? Yeah,
it's a very good point. The challenge with doing it without AI is that you have to prepare all of these essentially loops that can fluidly transition from one to another. So when you're a game composer, you have to create, all of those sad tracks for that particular level, if it has a unique song per level, say. And so what we've done is sort of abstracted that so that it's just every song that you play in our system can move from happy to sad to angry to tense, excited, all these different emotions, and it can do it in real time.
So aside from Infinite Album, AI is catching wind from Hollywood to every corner of the music industry. What are some of the applications in AI and music that you're most excited about?
Yeah, well, I'm a little biased personally that I feel the gaming opportunity is incredible because music has been sort of excluded a little bit from the gaming market in music because games sort of ship these end products. So the songs are just baked in, so there's no royalty system there. So we see it as a huge opportunity to get into this market of there's $135 billion worth of money spent every year on virtual goods. So all the in-app stores within games, and music is not a part of that. Partially because of rights, but also partially because of this format that's adaptive and hard to build if you're just a regular, music producer. So we see that as a huge opportunity.
It sounds like you're on the more optimistic end of the spectrum, but curious what your take is on what AI could mean for some specific jobs in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like any revolutionary technology, there's going to be jobs that are lost to AI. For example, I think probably production music libraries are going to be pretty hard. It's going to be pretty hard to compete there.
So I'm going to speak as a musician very briefly.
He's being very modest.
Well, I've played the drums for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
But, and my point is that a computer can take my drum kit over my dead body. And there are people like Sting and Nick Cave who have spoken out against AI. And I'm all for AI in general, but I always find it very annoying when I hear people saying, oh, isn't it great how you can just sequence this drum track? You don't need a drummer anymore. Like, in the sea, gone. Yeah. So I'm just curious, from that perspective, like, what are those people / me getting wrong about the potential for AI in music creation?
I think that it boils down to more about musical taste of the person using those AI tools rather than just being able to generate it. I don't think it's going to be very special if everybody can just generate a drum track. It's not going to be special and it's not going to have resonance with people unless you put your own unique spin on that drum track, because AI also does sort of generalize things. So it sort of makes it a little bit more bland. So I don't worry too much. I still think my hope is that it brings people to be inspired to learn how to play the drums.
I think, to a certain extent, for the last few years, technology has massively formed the bedrock of most recording studios, right? I mean, if you look at something like Pro Tools and plugins and triggers on drum kits, a personal bugbear of mine for some reason, even pitch correction and auto-tune and all that kind of stuff, like manipulating sound has in some way formed a core part of everything that we appreciate about modern music, even if singers can sing, for instance. I don't get why AI is so controversially different to some of those tools, depending on how it's used.
Yeah, I think the big difference is that a lot of AI models were trained on thousands to tens and thousands of artist content. So it's
the rights.
It's the rights, I think, is that what people are really concerned about. People right now especially assume that any big AI model is essentially infringing on copyright. And there's probably good arguments to say that some of them are.
Do you think that?
Yes, I think a good example of this recently was Stability, who worked with a production library specifically for their stable audio text-to-music solution. So they actually worked with a production library. They got 800,000 tracks. They licensed it from them. So that, at least, there was a clear line of a contract between the people who their music was trained on and the output, the company. So I think that's a recent thing, and I think people have even been talking about having like a universal license for training data, the same way that we have a license for playing music on the radio. So I think that's sort of the emerging ideas that are happening. But I think everybody agrees that you should have control over the music that you create.
Are you finding that music executives from the industry, like Sony, for example, are receptive to the idea of AI-generated music, or have they not really taken it seriously just yet?
It has changed quite a lot this year, actually. So this TikToker Ghostwriter came out with this fake Drake song where he used voice transformation to imitate Drake and The Weeknd. And he published it. He even submitted to the Grammys. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, it went viral.
He did.
Yeah, exactly. So that actually has changed the perception of AI quite a lot, negatively, I would say, because people thought, first of all, that it was a fully generated track, and it wasn't fully generated at all. He composed the whole thing, and then just for the voice, as far as I know, that was the whole thing. For the voice, he actually has to sing that first. So he probably did like an imitation of Drake and an imitation of The Weeknd, and then he used an AI model to transform the sound of the voice. So really, it was just sort of that last step, but obviously that there's a lot of issue. That's a very obvious issue with consent, and yeah, exactly.
And we've seen things since then of performances or cover versions performed by dead singers.
Yeah.
Over contemporary or even older songs. Very obviously without their permission. And a lot of the time it's just done for fun, or it's a proof of concept. And a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, it does always come across as it's kind of a, hey, look what we can do. It's not necessarily does anyone want us to, or should we? It's more like, this is possible, shall we explore it? And it seems that right now that's kind of where music creation broadly is, except for in the world of maybe things like video games or little bits and pieces on the edge. I don't know. It's a roundabout way of saying, I think drummers are safe, right?
I think you still are going to have to develop a really strong sense of musical taste to be able to really leverage these AI models. And the other thing is that, when people follow a particular artist, they don't only like just the sounds that they produce, right? It's a lot more than that. It's the personality of the artist. It's, their values. It's their aesthetic. So there's quite a lot more than that. And that's not something that AI is going to easily reproduce. So there is a sort of humanistic connection.
Some critics would say that AI-generated music will lead to a world in which music is standardized and formulaic and kind of divorced from the emotion that you just mentioned. And some of the best songs in history were written and inspired by feelings of love or loss, grief, and heartbreak. Is it possible to have AI-generated music that evokes these feelings, even if a machine didn't feel them?
I think that it's plausible. I think that an AI could do it, but it might be something that it sort of stumbled into. Because a lot of the times with AI, you're generating like a lot of content, and then the typical process is that humans go and curate that content. So you can generate 1,000 songs. Nobody cares about 1,000 songs, and nobody's going to listen to 1,000 songs. So there's quite a lot of effort in sort of the typical way that people interact with AI, where they're essentially digging through, a pile of generated material.
Let me ask you though, Ryan, I mean, do you think the hype at the moment is kind of ahead of the reality of what is possible or desirable musically right now?
Yes, absolutely. I think it was so easy to make a headline for the last 3-4 years, I would say, where someone would come out with a song and say, this was generated with AI. And everybody just assumes that it was completely generated with AI. And there's a huge range between what the human contributed and between what the AI contributed. And that's really sort of what we're trying to be transparent about. There's this huge range. People there is creativity on what AI models you choose. There's like artistic vision with what AI models you choose. There's like hundreds of different ways you can approach it. People even sort of subvert AI models where they like use a text model for generating notes or, vice versa. So yeah, I think the hype, there is a bit more hype around AI and a little bit more fear because of those sort of attention-grabbing headlines and the ability to do that. So,
like you and your drums.
Again, over my dead body, they're staying with me.
Yeah.
Ryan Groves, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Tom Keel, great to have you here. Now, you're the interim CEO of UK Music, which is a British music representative body. Tell us how you work with artists and labels and the wider industry at the moment, and how that's changing with AI.
Sure. Well, we're a representative body for the music industry. So we bring together all the various component parts. That might be the record companies, the publishing organizations, the creator organizations, all those kind of trade association and campaigning organizations that have an interest within the music industry. We bring them together under UK Music, and we talk to Parliament and government in the UK about shared priorities. And an issue like AI has been something which has really brought the sector very much together in terms of our shared response.
Yeah, I bet. So what are the nature of the conversations been this year on the topic of AI specifically?
Well, sure. Well, the UK government last year proposed changing copyright law to basically make it easier to use AI technology without permission and licenses, and actually that would create a lot of concern amongst the music industry. And so we campaigned against that proposal, and the UK government ended up sort of essentially reversing that and decided not to proceed with that exemption. But it's raised a lot of issues about the impact of AI on our sector, and I think we're really trying to get to grips with that. We've produced a position paper for the sector, which we've worked towards, and that sets out a number of areas where we think that the UK government actually globally, we can maybe take a leadership role in actually making sure that industries like music are protected, whilst also working together with AI firms to make sure we grow in tandem.
And you also very recently met with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to discuss the impact AI is having on the industry. What specifically came out of those conversations?
Well, we basically met with some of his advisors in his team about AI and technology. Within our position paper, we made a number of recommendations, particularly around maybe like how the training process with AI technology goes, how that works in practice to make sure that consent and creators' consent is part of that. So we talked very much deeply involved in that.
Are there any points of disagreement between those two parties?
In which two parties?
Between you and the government?
I think we want them to grow in tandem. I think we want them to basically say that the law it gives protection to creators, and to put that firmly in place. So I mean, there is an idea of this being some kind of code of conduct, which the Intellectual Property Office in the UK is developing. That's around trying to bring the AI companies and some of the rights holders and creator organisations that we represent, trying to get them to agree something.
It's probably worth us taking a nice, comfortable step back and saying, what was being proposed as an exemption to copyright as a result of AI? Like, what was being proposed as a good idea?
Sure. Well, the government was proposing last year to basically enable people to use copyrighted protected content for AI purposes without the permission for licenses.
So it intrigues me, because if you listen to enough music, you are being, a person, Jackie, is being inspired by like that artist's work. And so when Jackie picks up a guitar, which I've seen her do, sort of, and starts writing songs in the style of whoever,
Taylor Swift.
She's inspired by her. And like, how is that different from just feeding that music into a system?
It's a very good point. I mean, we would say that inspiration there's always something behind that, whether you've heard a song on a radio, or you've heard it on a streaming service, or you've bought the kind of sheet music to learn that song. There's always some kind of like back-end transaction between whoever created the content and the rights holders, and then who's then putting it out to the public. And so people have essentially bought a license to use it in some way, can be inspired in that way. What's not happening, or potentially isn't happening within the AI sphere, and what the proposal would have done was to actually kind of cut that process out and actually say, well, you can train AI systems, these large language models, they can be trained on music and copyrighted protected materials, but without that permission being needed at all, and so that compensation. So it's another form of that debate, essentially.
But it's financial. I mean, what if a theoretical company that wanted to train an AI model on all of, insert major record label's name here, on all of their copyrighted works, could they not just pay a very fancy subscription type fee and have it fed in? I mean, would that be a solution?
Well, I mean, the music industry has a number of licensing solutions in place to achieve that. That's all based on negotiation. What the proposal would have cut out any kind of negotiation on that. So there isn't necessarily a licensing solution based at the moment. As I said, we're learning all the time about how AI actually works, and one of our keey recommendations in our paper was around transparency and actually making sure that the AI firms have audited or kept records, so we actually get that data to know what's actually being fed in, so that the right people's works can be compensated as well. So I think there's a complicated system, but because things are growing at an exponential level, we're all trying to keep pace with it. This isn't a time to really undo that legislative framework.
On that note, earlier this year, Spotify pulled a track that had AI cloned voices of The Weeknd and Drake. And just very recently, the CEO came out and said that it wouldn't consider a complete ban of AI-generated music, which to some might seem controversial given their previous move with The Weeknd and Drake track. What's your stance on what should and shouldn't be banned?
The Drake Weeknd example is a very interesting one, because from what I understand, we've heard it was pulled because of an uncleared sample rather than the kind of like the fact that it was AI generated. One of the things we've been arguing for is about labeling and making sure that there's from a sectoral point of view, that it's quite clear to consumers whether something's being created with AI purposes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've looked for in the liner notes of albums, and it doesn't say, oh, well, this song was engineered using these Pro Tools plugins, and or on a lot of pop songs, and not even just pop songs, but most modern music has some degree of manipulation involved in it. It doesn't, we're not expected to see how that sausage was made. We just sort of generally accept that some degree of electronic manipulation was done. So why should AI be any different?
Well, I think the industry has been using AI for a number of years, whether it's at an artistic level, and as you say, there's that innovation has been happening within the sector. People want to use it, certainly. We think that our issue is more about the generative point. It's about how you generate a new piece of music from existing other pieces of work, and then the output, because that could have potentially quite big commercial success, and then it would transfer value away from the creators in the sector that created it.
To the point that you were making earlier about looking through the notes of how a song is composed or what tools are used in a particular song, I think that's a really unique example because you play the drums, you're a pretty sophisticated listener. Most of us aren't. If I hear a song that sounds cool, it's great, but I'm not looking up exactly what instruments were used. To your point about music education and kind of bolstering that framework for future generations of artists, what do you think needs to be done now in an AI context?
I mean, I think you're raising a very good point, in particular if you think about things like film soundtracks and video game soundtracks. These are actually very big parts of the music industry in terms of the growth potential. A lot of the people we're concerned about within AI, that is their living, but they may not have the kind of profile of an artist. But how do you kind of protect that situation? I think that's a lot of where our concerns come from. I'd also say another area we're kind of exploring, which kind of moving away from the kind of issue around copyright law, but around more personality rights as well for the artists who do actually have quite a significant profile. But more generally, it kind of goes into wider areas of civic society about the idea of deep fakes and political campaigning and ensuring that there's personality rights are not as strong in the UK as they are in some other parts of the world. So one of the arguments we've been talking about with UK government is to see if we can kind of strengthen that particular regime too, to make sure that is secure.
Have you seen any good examples elsewhere in the world of unique approaches to not necessarily regulating AI music, but protecting artists that you think should really be applied worldwide?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question because in the EU at the moment, there's a proposal regarding an AI Act. So it's not law yet, but they're obviously taking steps there. Also, I mean, even countries such as China, we actually are seeing that they are putting some quite robust mechanisms. So from a UK government point of view, for us to kind of be seen behind China in that way is actually quite problematic, really.
Talk to us about how artificial intelligence is impacting the economics of the music industry and what that ultimately could mean for consumers.
I think it's probably too early to fully say yet. I mean, we do annual reports on the music industry. We've got one coming out very soon. In terms of capturing the sort of economic value, I think is probably a little bit too early yet. There's potentially huge growth potential in AI for society, and so as a commercially minded music industry, we want to be part of that success, but we kind of need to have our underlying business model protected in that process too.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tom.
Thank you.